Hello and welcome to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Entertainment Network. I am your host, Sarah. As always, I am delighted to be with you on another Tuesday for another author interview. As we get started, I would like to remind you to please like and follow the show, subscribe on whatever platform you are watching or listening to this show on. That really does help the algorithm, gets the show out to more people. Also, in terms of helpful things that you can do, if you would like to leave a tip or a donation, you can go to gsmcpodcast.info. This is very helpful not only to GSMC Book Review Podcast, it is helpful to the entire network as a whole. And I thank you for any donation or tip that you might give. Again, that link is at gsmcpodcast.info. If you would like to include a question or a comment when you leave a tip or a donation, I would be happy to engage with that question or comment at the beginning of the next episode after you leave said question or comment. So how is your week going so far? It was Memorial Day weekend in the US. I, of course, forgot here because it's not celebrated here in Portugal, of course. Just had a relatively normal day yesterday, but had a very nice weekend. Hubby and I have been going for longer walks. We are exhausting our poor puppies. They come home and sleep for a really long time, but they love the walks while we're out on them. We've been getting up early, which is not my cup of tea. I'm not a morning person. It's not that I can't get up early, or I used to always either schedule to work to open at the library on campus in college, or I would schedule an 8 a.m. class. So it's not that I can't get up or that I'm not motivated to get up. It's just that I don't wake up easily. So it takes me quite a while to actually wake up and get going and get moving. So we're partway through our, it's almost a 6-mile walk we've been doing, and it's a ways into that, maybe a good half mile before I'm communicating in more than just grunts to the hubby's comments and questions and conversation. He is an external processor and has no problem carrying the conversation to my early morning non-awakeness. So it works out well. At any rate, that's what we've been doing. It has been wonderful, sunny, of course. Yesterday was in the 80s. Today it's a little chillier a little chillier in the high 70s. So beautiful, beautiful weather. Hope that you are having beautiful weather wherever you are. I know that there are really crazy storms going on in Oklahoma, especially. My oldest niece lives there, and so very concerned about that. Keeping tabs on her. So if you live in an area that's having crazy storms, I hope that you are safe. But let's go ahead and turn to our book for today. I am speaking with Melodie Edwards. We are talking about her modernization of the novel Persuasion by Jane Austen. It's called Once Persuaded, Twice Shy, and let me give you the description of that book. When Anne Elliott broke up with Ben Wentworth, it seemed like the right thing to do. But now, 8 years later, she's not so sure. In her scenic hometown of Niagara-on-the-Lake, Anne is comfortable focusing on her successful career, filling her late mother's shoes as town councilor and executive director of her theater company. She certainly keeps busy as the all-around wrangler of eccentric locals, self-centered family members, elaborate festivals, and the occasional attacking goose. But the more she tries to convince herself that her life is fine as is, the more it feels like a show, and not nearly as good as the ones put on by her theater company. She's the always responsible Anne, always taken for granted and cleaning up after other people, and the memories of happier times with Ben Wentworth still haunt her. So when the nearby Kellynch Winery is bought by Ben's aunt and uncle, Anne's world is set ablaze as her old flame crashes back into her life. And it's clear he hasn't forgiven her for breaking his heart. A joint project between the winery and Anne's theater forces both Ben and Anne to confront their complicated history. And as they spend more time together, Anne can't help but wonder if there might be hope for their future after all. So again, that is the description of Once Persuaded, Twice Shy. As you heard, it is a modernization of Persuasion by Jane Austen. I mentioned at the end of the last episode that Persuasion might be my favorite Jane Austen novel, and I might have slightly misspoke. I really love Persuasion, but it's definitely one of my favorite Jane Austen heroines. I really like Anne as a heroine, and Melody and I are going to talk about Anne more as the heroine, partly because she's an old heroine. She's 28 at the time of the book. The Anne in this book is in her early 30s, 32 if I'm remembering correctly. But I love Anne, and that she's old and people have given up on her prospects. But also, this one has one of my favorite quotes from Jane Austen, and that is when Wentworth writes to Anne that he is half agony, half hope as he awaits her reply. And there's something about that no matter how many times I read or listen to this book, that one just, it gets me every time. I love that line. But let's go ahead and let Melody talk about her modernization of Persuasion, why she chose to modernize this particular novel, etc. Let's go ahead and turn to that interview. Again, the book is called Once Persuaded, Twice Shy. The author is Melodie Edwards. Hi, Melody. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for being here. I'm very excited to have you here to talk about Once Persuaded, Twice Shy. Before we talk about the book, though, if you wouldn't mind just taking a minute and sharing a little bit about yourself so my listeners can get to know you, that would be great.
Of course, my name is Melodie Edwards. I'm a Canadian. I am living here just outside of the city of Toronto. I have a degree in English literature and a master's in communications, and I worked for many years in corporate communications. And then back in 2020, I wrote my first novel, which came out and was Jane and Edward. And I was very lucky, and I got a chance to write more books. And so my second novel, Once Persuaded, Twice Shy, was just released back in February. And they are both modern retellings of classic tales. Jane and Edward is based loosely on Jane Eyre, and Once Persuaded, Twice Shy is based on Jane Austen's Persuasion.
Yes, I have many, many, many questions. Even more so than usual. I love both Jane Eyre and Jane Austen, so you're in good company. But let's start with Once Persuaded, Twice Shy, and just give an overview of the modernization.
Of course. So Once Persuaded, Twice Shy is set in Niagara-on-the-Lake, which is a small town here in Canada, right near the American border. It's a beautiful place. They've got a theater festival, they've got wineries. It's very scenic. And so my protagonist, Anne Elliott, is, in her 30s and a town councilor and running the theater festival. And when we meet her, she'd had a breakup 8 years ago with Wentworth, who seemed rather flaky at the time and not like a good choice. And now, of course, 8 years later, he's the one who got away. So, of course, we've got to bring them back together. Wentworth comes into town for business. And then it's sort of everything that Anne thought she had tightly controlled in her life is unspooling from there as they keep encountering each other over and over again.
Of course, as happens in these types of stories, if they don't encounter each other, the plot's not going to move forward. In terms of Austen, there's lots out there in terms of the commentary on her works, modernization of her works, etc. So where do you even start when you decide you're going to tackle a project like this?
Oh, it's so tough. There's so many fabulous modern retellings and even, in their time period spin-offs of, Jane Austen's work. And it is tough because, we're a very rabid fandom and we like what we like and we don't like what we don't like. So it's always a little bit nerve-wracking, but I think the thing is just you approach the project with love. I'm a huge Jane Austen fan. I love Persuasion. And the original source material is so rich that there's infinite numbers of ways that you can retell this story. I mean, an early idea I had for Persuasion was Anne as a triage nurse in an ER. And so just sort of what I tried to do is try to find the heart of the character, and then I try to translate it to modern times. So in the original Persuasion, Regency era women are very constrained, but Anne is actually secretly, sneakily very competent. She's the one sort of drawing up a budget when her family's in debt, and she's the one who has to say goodbye to the tenants on their estate, and she's the one that has to take care of her middle sister when she's ill and call the doctor when her nephew gets injured, and on it goes. So I took this idea of Anne is absolutely competent, and then how would that look in modern times? So I gave her a big career in a small town, and I let it go from there. And then you just have to hope that other fans of Austen approach it with the same love that you do.
I'm sure it can go either way with fans because they can be passionate in lots of ways. Let's just that's as
Which
tactful
is
as I
which
can
is
say.
great.
Yeah,
Which is
yeah,
great. You know, I know there was a Persuasion that came out on Netflix recently, 2022, and it really divided the fans. It was like release the Kraken. Some fans were just
oh,
roasting it, and some were like, no, I kind of liked it. But I love a fandom that you can spend 6 hours at a coffee date with someone debating whether or not that was a good persuasion and why.
and I
And
will
I think,
say, get a bowl of popcorn and just watch like TikToks or go read comments on that Netflix, and you
yeah.
will not be disappointed because it's entertainment in itself.
Oh, absolutely. And you've got to be impressed that someone who wrote hundreds of years ago is inspiring this level
Oh,
of fervor over
yeah,
adaptations, which I love.
yes, absolutely. I am definitely fangirling a little bit over this conversation because it's just so fun to have someone to talk about Jane Austen with. My husband was laughing at me as I was fangirling, and his response was, "It's not like you're talking to Jane Austen." And I said, "Well, that's, that would be amazing. Weird." But I just appreciate having someone that also appreciates Jane Austen. Am not the most well-read Jane Austen person. I'm not, I don't know all of the quotes or anything, but I am fangirling a bit here. So, and I do love the nature of the fandom that allows for people to have very spirited discussions. Sometimes they are not happy with the way one of their beloved Jane Austen novels has been treated, and the movie that we were just talking about is one of those examples. But hey, they are passionate, and I do appreciate the passion. So we're going to go ahead and take our first break of this episode. When we come back, we will be talking about why modernize Persuasion of all of the Jane Austen novels to choose from. Stay tuned. You are listening to and or watching the GSMC Book Review podcast, and I will be right back.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great. I don't wanna go to work, cause my boss is a jerk, and I'm not even that paid. I need a change in my life, cause I don't feel alive, and there's nothing that makes me happy. Hold my beer for a minute, I'm about to quit my job, cash in for a ticket. I'm going on a trip and I don't plan to visit. I'm gonna stay there till I feel like I'm winning, and this is just the beginning. I need a big change, help me feel like living. I need a big swing, home runs I'm hitting, and I'll never look back, moving on till I get it all. And we all got dreams, we all want things, but what you gonna do for it? How you gonna move for it? What you gonna be? And do you believe you can do anything?
Hi, Melody. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for being here. I'm very excited to have you here to talk about. Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review podcast and my conversation with Melodie Edwards. We are talking about her novel, Once Persuaded, Twice Shy. Before the break, we were talking about the Jane Austen fandom and how they don't always agree. In fact, they probably rarely agree on anything, but they are fierce and passionate in their disagreement and their fandom, and I can appreciate that a lot. As we get into this second segment, I do want to remind you that you can leave a tip or a donation at gsmcpodcast.info, and as a reminder that if you do want to include a question or a comment with that tip or a donation, I would be happy to engage with that question or comment at the beginning of the next episode. The link again is gsmcpodcast.info. It really does help not only this podcast, but the network as a whole. And as always, I thank you for all of the support that you have given this podcast and the network over the years. I greatly appreciate my listeners and now those of you who are watching the video podcasts. So let's go ahead and return to the conversation with Melodie. why Persuasion? It's not one of the, I would say Sense and Sensibility, Pride and Prejudice are definitely the top tier that people think of when they think, but I personally love Persuasion. So why Persuasion for your first Jane Austen modernization?
Yeah, this one's a little off the beaten path. When I was younger, Pride and Prejudice was my favorite, but as I got older, Persuasion was my favorite. And I think there's something special about the fact that it was the last novel she completed before she died. I know Austen left us with a couple of fragments, the Watsons and Sanditon, that she didn't get to complete, but Persuasion was the last completed one. It's unique in that we have, quote unquote, an older heroine in her late 20s, as opposed to most of them were 17 to
Oh,
21.
spinster, yeah.
And yeah, unlike the other Austen novels, we start with her heart already broken. I mean, most of the heroines, Emma and the others, were following them, falling in love or figuring out they're in love or changing who they're in love with. But never do we start with someone who's just absolutely heartbroken and has made peace with that. There's no falling back in love with Wentworth. It never went away. It's just how are we going to navigate coming at this as two very different adults now when we had this early love. And I think it's special. And I just think Anne is one of the most complicated of Austen's heroines. So that was a lot of fun to look at.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, she's one of my favorites as well because she is quote unquote old at 28, which but I'm always she's still the younger sister, so she's got an unmarried older sister. I always want to throw that out there. She's
You know what? I have the exact same bugaboo. Oh my goodness. I wrote a whole blog post on this for I'm gonna forget the outlet now, but because it drives me nuts that Anne is old at 27 or 28, and her sister is 30 and still considered eligible and on the market. And people should also remember that at 27, Jane Austen herself got a marriage proposal that she accepted and then later changed her mind on. So I always try to make the point it's not so much the actual age, it's the attitude. Anne's heartbroken. She's mentally put herself on the shelf, and everyone else has taken their cue from that. When the young people are dancing, she's there playing the piano. She sits with the chaperones and such. And her sister is very much out there and flirting, several years older than her. So it's really a matter of attitude and how you regard yourself.
and you've talked about modernizing Anne and giving her a career, etc. Her father and her sister, only one sister in the modernization, but which is probably easier. Okay, let me back up. While reading your book this week, I decided it was time to do a reread of Persuasion. So I listened to Persuasion while reading Once Persuaded, Twice Shy, which is way fun. Everyone should do it. But so I always forget just how complicated the list of characters can be in an Austen novel. So let's start with, how do you decide who to leave in, who to leave out, who to kind of take bits and pieces of? Just talk about coming up with the character list.
Yeah, it's tough. It sounds like you had a great Austenathon for a week then. That sounds like so much fun.
Good week, yeah.
Um, so what I usually do is, like I said, I start with the heroine. The heroine to me is the most important part of any Austen novel. So I have to have a very strong idea of who Anne is back then and who my Anne is now in the modern time. And then any characters that interact with her in the original or mine, it's really about what aspect of Anne are they bringing out or abusing, or, it's all about her interaction. So for the two sisters, I kept the eldest sister because, like I said, I thought it was important that one sister is still out there living her life large, no problem. I got rid of the hypochondriac middle sister simply because in the small town setting I created, there's so many calls upon Anne's time that I kind of thought the many townspeople who are bugging her for this and needing that, and I need your attention on this and your help on that. That's kind of my stand-in for the second sister, because in Austen's novel, you would be rather stuck with your family party, but a modern woman, you go out into the world and you have a career. So the people that she interacts with in her career are like a stand-in, a composite for the second sister in everything they bug her about. And that's kind of my thinking in all the characters. Who is bothering Anne and what would be the modern equivalent, and who does that character become?
Yes. And I love at one point you even just made a nod to the fact that Anne does not have to have this very insular community that the original Anne Elliott would have had when she's talking herself into going to a social event, and she says, you know, you don't have to only spend time with this small set of people. It's not Jane Austen. So I like
Yeah.
that you just threw that out there.
Well, that's the tricky thing, right? Because in Jane Austen's time, Anne doesn't have any choice whether she's going to these house parties or having dinner with these people. But in modern times, they'd be like, if your ex-boyfriend's there, don't go. Stay home that night, put on Netflix. It's fine. And so it was always trying to construct reasons that Anne would have to go and be in modern times in these places where she's uncomfortable. And at one point, yeah, it's just her saying, why am I doing this to myself?
Yeah. So when it comes to characters, and you said you tend to start with the heroine, kind of work from there, but do you like to have a really good sense of your characters before you start writing, or do you prefer that they evolve as you write, or some combination thereof?
I know who my heroine is from start to finish. Like that doesn't change in my head. I probably spend the most time on trying to figure out who my heroine is. And then other characters pop up if and when I feel like I need them. Sometimes they happen kind of organically. Persuasions, there's a lot of interior thinking for Anne. Like we spend a lot of time with Anne's thoughts. I thought in modern times she'd probably have a friend. So then she's got her friend Vidya, who works in the theater department with her, who's a costumer. And then, as I have Anne going around being super competent, suddenly she had an assistant pop up who's very Gen Z Emmy, who's just what I loved about Anne is ultimately so self-controlled and so diplomatic that I thought, my God, let's give her the devil on her shoulder, who's Emmy, who just lives for the chaos and has no filter on her mouth and just barrels into any situation. And she's tremendous fun to write. But it all helps to play off Anne. And then, like I said, her best friend Vidya is, whereas Anne's very stoic with her emotions, Vidya's like, I'm going to make you a Taylor Swift playlist. I want you to feel your emotions. Let's sit and cry and eat ice cream. So it's all those elements of Anne that she doesn't really allow herself to have. And then I put them in other characters so you can kind of see what she's missing. So again, it's always like a kind of a mirror ball off the heroine.
Yeah. And then obviously you had to be very familiar with Persuasion, which I'm sure was not a terrible hardship, but what other types of research did you do in the writing of this novel?
Many rereadings of Persuasion, which, as you said, no hardship, such tremendous fun. I have a couple different versions of Persuasion, and I have a particular one. I think it's called the Broadview edition, which I believe is a particular academic Canadian publisher. And they're brilliant because not only do they have all the footnotes about like what kind of carriage means what, but they have all kinds of essays in the back on this novel. And they even have Jane Austen's original ending for this novel. She had an ending that she wrote out, and they have pictures of her handwriting. And she just, I guess, decided it was too abrupt. And so she scrapped it and she wrote a new ending. So it's kind of fun to even see in her drafting where she was going, what she was playing out, and what she rejected is not quite right for her characters, which just, again, gives you further illumination into the psychology of those characters. And then probably not research, but I did it anyways. I watch all the movie adaptations, which I've already seen them all, but I did it again. Highly recommend the 2007 version. It's delightful.
I was just going to ask, because you do make mention of that in your introductory note to the book of everyone has their favorite movie. So is 2007 your favorite?
It's my favorite. I love the 95 version because I understand, and many people, reached out to me and said, what about the 95 version? Yes, 95 version, full of its worth. But and 95 is most accurate to the novel. But the 2007 version is just such beautiful production. And I love the actress, Sally Hawkins, who's from The Shape of Water. When she was younger, she was doing this. She just does a beautiful Anne. Sweeping soundtrack, beautiful shots of Bath in England. And as I said, they incorporated a little bit of Jane Austen's discarded endings. You almost kind of get two endings. There's a conversation they have about the lease of Kellynch, and originally that was how they resolved their issues and got together. And then she has them have that conversation and then get interrupted, and then you get pivoted into the actual ending where she's running with the letter through Bath. So it's delightful.
Yes. I'd forgotten about that. I need to rewatch. Clearly, after I reread, now I need to rewatch. You need to do a rewatch of lots of Jane Austen movies, I realized as I was getting ready for this interview that I have not read Persuasion in 13 years, I think it was. 11 or 13. I think it was 2011 the last time I read it. And the only reason I know that is because, as I've mentioned before, I keep a list of every book that I've read since 2007. I wish it went back further than that, but that's when I started it. And the last time I read Persuasion was 2011. So it was definitely time for a reread. But it is also now time for our second break of this episode. When we come back, we'll be talking a little bit more about this novel in terms of what Melodie hopes readers might take away from it in terms of Jane Austen as a whole and as this as a modernization of Persuasion. So stay tuned. You are listening to and or watching the GSMC Book Review podcast, and I will be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review podcast. Before the break, Melodie was talking a little bit about not only one of the versions of Persuasion, but also how it incorporated the alternate ending that Jane Austen had written for Persuasion, that there is an alternate ending that, of course, is not the one that we are all familiar with, but that one version of the movie does incorporate a little bit of that ending. So that inspired me to realize that I needed to go back and rewatch. But while I ponder when I'm going to rewatch, which ones I'm going to rewatch, let's go ahead and return to the interview with Melodie. You're obviously a fan, and so this is kind of a labor of love. So you have a built-in audience of Austen fanatics, but what do you hope? Do you hope that readers might find Austen through this work, or is there a bigger hope for the story, or you just wrote it because you love Persuasion?
Well, I love interacting with the Austen fandom just in general, so that's just tremendous fun. But I like to think I love Austen's heroines. They're such unique women. They're so psychologically rich. Like they're just characters that come to the ages. I like the idea that if you don't pick up an original Austen, you might pick up this and still get to meet Anne Elliott because she is a brilliant heroine. It's interesting. I was just in Pittsburgh a few weeks ago for the Greater Pittsburgh Book Festival, and I had to do a panel with contemporary romance authors. And when we were talking with some of the audience after, some of the women were saying, you know what? I've never read Austen. I've kind of been intimidated by the language, but I think I might pick up an Austen now. And I'm like, yes, absolutely do it. Do not be intimidated by the language. Just get one with footnotes. And then they were like, oh, footnotes, I don't know about that. I'm like, no, because the footnotes are going to tell you the difference between that carriage versus this carriage. And then you'll know why someone's being snotty with each other. Like it's Real Housewives insults there on a very subtle level, but the footnotes are going to help that. And like, oh, footnotes for insults. Okay, I like that. I'm like, yeah, it's fun. Go for it. So I hope more people do go back to the original Austens, whether to read it or to watch a movie adaptation or to pick up a modern retelling, because I think for everyone, but particularly for women, these are fabulous heroines and fabulous stories.
Yeah. And I can also say, because I'm a huge book fan, and if you listen to it sometimes, because sometimes when you're reading, you can get really bogged down in the language, especially the conversations can feel stilted. So if you get a really good narrator who brings those to life, I think that's very helpful as well, because Austen is funny and she's got these characters that are just often obnoxious.
Yeah, she's so snarky. She does not get enough props for her humor. She's absolutely just acerbic with it. I love it.
And listening this time, I realized that I have a friend, and she's not from London originally, but she's lived in London for the last 40 years. She seriously sounds like an Austen character, like the way she talks about things sometimes. And I didn't realize it until I just re-listened to this, and I was like, oh my gosh, that's the way she talks. That kind of, they were very pleased, not, she doesn't say these things, but they were very pleased with my company, sort of like conversations. And I'm like, oh my
That's
God,
fabulous.
character. I love it. Outside of modernization, what draws you to writing romance?
I'm from a family of girls. I have two older sisters, from a female household. So, we're teenagers. We have all our friends over. Romance is just, it's just there. It's what we like, right? We had Gilmore Girls on, and we had a party for the episode where Luke and Lorelai get together. We loved all the adaptations. We definitely had the 1995 Pride and Prejudice running on a loop on our TV. Um, and it's a lovely collection of people who read romance, who enjoy romance, who write romance. But it's also just I've been working in corporate communications in the financial sector. And I went into that career because it's a heavy writing career for me. It's press releases and briefing memos and all kind of that. And I enjoyed it immensely. But it's very dry, technical writing, very precise, very particular language. So for a break, for something different, just kind of a fatigue with that, I went to write romance because romance is the opposite. It's colorful and it's descriptive and it's emotive and there's banter and there's jokes and there's modern lingo, and it was really a refreshing change of pace for me, and it was fun to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Are you working on anything now?
Yes, I have a contract for a couple more books. So I owe books. I'm working on an original novel now, women's fiction, which I won't say any more about because every time I give details on it, I then change my mind and it changes. But I do hope after this one actually to get back to more retellings. And I'd love to keep going off kind of the beaten path. I'd love to do a Mansfield Park retelling. I feel that Fanny Price is overlooked as a heroine. I'd love to do Elizabeth Gaskell's North and South, or something like Far from the Madding Crowd. Like, just there's so many of those great novels out there to try and take apart for my own paint box.
Yeah, you will not run out of material. You started with Jane and Edward. As much as I love Jane Austen, I love Jane Eyre even more. So I will not fangirl. I mean, I've already fangirled all over you. I will not just like fangirl. But do you want to talk a little bit about Jane and Edward as well?
Absolutely. That was my very first one, and it's loosely based on Jane Eyre. But you don't have to have read Jane Eyre to enjoy it. And it is set in a law firm in Toronto. Um, I love Jane Eyre. Again, I love the heroine so much. She's such a complicated but mighty little heroine. And I really think that she could have, that she belonged in modern times as well. Some heroines you look at and you're like, you're kind of really shaped by your century, but not Jane Eyre. And it was fun to write that one because I've heard this description that Brontes are like whiskey and Austen is like champagne. And so again, it was kind of a moodier way of doing a contemporary romance, very high drama, high angst, which is all fun to write. Um, but just, yeah, I love the idea. I had worked in a number of law firms in Toronto as a communications person, and I just thought it was a really unique setting with very much the hierarchy and the unspoken rules and kind of the contained ecosystem that you get at Thornfield Hall. And I started picturing a modern Jane sitting in a cubicle in one of these firms long after I'd left them too. I was still thinking about it. And so that became my first novel.
It's on my TBR now, but may I ask, is there an equivalent? Is there a counterpart to the slightly crazy wife in the attic?
Slightly. There is a counterpart, but
I don't want to call her crazy because it's not her fault.
it's not her fault. And there's a lot of things we could say about that particular plot line. No, I dodged the entire question of mental health and the treatment of it. I made it I don't want to spoil too much, but I made it a business arrangement that has gone awry, that has resulted in these secrets around Mr. Rochester, who I call Edward Rosen in my book. So you will encounter the surprise wife, which I don't feel is spoiling anything because most people know there's a wife there, but there's different reasons why she's hidden, why she's involved, why he can't be free of her. So I just took a different route with that. It was tricky to do, but it was fun to do.
Yeah. Okay. I will not probe you with 1,000 questions. what you did. You've touched on this briefly in terms of having written things that can be very dry and technical, and writing fiction is a different avenue. But was writing for publication something you always wanted to do? Did you come to that decision later in life? What was that path for you?
I've always written. I wrote plays in my teenage years, for some local competitions and things like that. And when I went to university, I was doing my undergrad in English Lit. I was writing for the student paper, and I was working on plays and I think a couple short stories again. And then I went to the corporate world and I was writing for that. So it's always been writing in one format or another. I'm not actually too hung up on what the content is or what the format is. If I'm writing a speech for a CEO or a play for the local theater or a novel for Penguin Random House, I'm having fun any way I do it. So, but yeah, I'd been in corporate writing for about 12 years. And somewhere around, I think the 9 or 10 year mark, I started to kind of to miss the creative writing. And I wrote a play just in my spare time for fun. I sent it off to Writer's Digest and I won the grand prize of their writing competition. I was like, oh, okay, that happened. And it was very nice. And part of that prize was an invitation to New York for their annual conference. And they had a particular session where there was literary agents in kind of like, I think they called it a pitch slam, where you just get to go talk to literary agents about things you're working on. And I'd only worked on plays, but I thought I had this idea for a novel. And so I went and talked to them about this novel, which is what you're not supposed to, you're never supposed to pitch a novel you haven't actually written, but I did that. And then it was great to get that feedback and to hear about how contemporary romance works and things like that. And then a couple more years went by, and then I finally sat down and wrote Jane and Edward. So the creative writing's been creeping up on me again through the last 12 years, but it was always there in the background.
Well, I, for one, am very glad that the creative writing crept up on her because, as I mentioned, I really love Jane Eyre as well, and I very much want to read Jane and Edward. I am noticing the sunshine behind me, and you can see that it's later in the day here with the sun coming in my patio doors. So hopefully that's not creating too many weird shadows, but not much I can do about that except be grateful for the sunshine. So it is time for our final break of this episode. When we come back, advice from Melodie for aspiring authors. So stay tuned. You are listening to and or watching the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back. Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and my conversation with author Melodie Edwards. Before the break, Melodie was talking about writing fiction, writing for publication, how that process worked for her in terms of becoming a published author and writing novels. And now we are going to go and continue that conversation with the conclusion of this interview with Melodie Edwards. From that experience, what advice do you have for people who might want to write?
Write for the joy of it, enjoy the project. There's, the road to publishing is different for everybody. There's lots of criticism, there's lots of feedback, there's lots of cheerleading. And I think the best approach is always to look at writing as a craft that you enjoy and that you'll perpetually be working on to improve, for better or for worse. So, when I first started writing my novel, I sent it off to, I think, a dozen literary agents, and I was excited just to get rejections. Like that was fun for me. And then I was very lucky. A couple of them got back to me positively, and I signed with my agent I have now, who I adore. And then it was just, and then we got an editor, and then at Berkeley, which is Kate Seaver, who's wonderful. And then it was like, what about this character? And why did you do this character? And you just honestly enjoy working through the project, no matter what the project is, no matter what stage the project's in.
Nice. You're the only person I've encountered who enjoyed getting rejections, so that's positive. That's good.
Well, like I said, that's probably been helped by the fact that like in corporate communications, I was doing so much writing, but you're writing for so many different people, and you do get rejected. Like you write a press release, you might have to write the same press release 3 different ways depending on what might happen. Or you write a press release and you take it to one senior partner who says it's too long, and his partner one door over in the office says actually it's too short, and you have to go, okay. And I've ghosted op-eds that my name haven't gone on as author and stuff. So you detach from the writing to a certain extent, in that you enjoy the process of the writing, but the product is a product, like a sweater on the shelf that people are going to pick up and put down and like and stretch out or not like. And then you just you get a certain amount of acceptance with that. So I loved writing my novel, and then yes, rejections to me were exciting. So like, look at that. I'm so far that I am getting rejections from a literary agent in Manhattan. That is amazing. And I enjoyed that.
Awesome. When you take time to read just for you, besides the classics, you can include those, of course, but favorite authors and genres.
Oh, well, my favorite author is probably Charles Dickens, because I love those long, twisting Victorian dramas. But for contemporaries, I love murder mystery. I love to read in romance, but since I started writing romance, I find it a bit difficult because you start to get distracted by other people's plots and characters, as opposed to your own. So I love murder mysteries. I love Anthony Horowitz. He has a great series called Hawthorne and Horowitz, where he, as the author, has actually written himself into the murder mysteries. He's shadowing a private detective so he can write novels about this private detective, but he keeps getting wound up in the mysteries. And so he's like, what am I doing getting stabbed in this dark basement? Like, I'm an author, I should be home editing. They're really funny. So I love those. I do love a murder mystery, and the higher the body count, the better.
Okay. Gruesome, but all right. It's good to know. I know you have a website, so if you can share that. So if people want to find out more about you and the books, tell the website and then any social media that you're active on.
For sure. My website is, I believe, melodieedwards.com. So it's just my name, with all the D's and S's in it. And Melody, sorry, spelled Melodie as opposed to Y. I am on X, but I don't use it very much anymore. You can mainly find me on Instagram, and my handle is Melodie Writes Edwards. And I'm always very happy to hear from people on Instagram. I love it when readers reach out.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Melody, we've talked about a few different things, but is there anything that we have not covered that you wanted to make sure you highlighted during this time?
No, I don't think so. I just think any entry point into the Austen fandom is a lovely one. Come and play with us. It's fantastic. Enjoy the movies, enjoy the audiobooks, enjoy the retellings, enjoy the originals, enjoy the parodies. They're all out there.
Get sucked down the rabbit hole.
Absolutely. Just never look back. Go down the rabbit hole head first and don't look back. It's fantastic.
Do you have a favorite, not original, not original Austen, but a favorite retelling, parody, anything? What's your go-to?
So, P.D. James wrote a sequel to Pride and Prejudice that is also a murder mystery called Death Comes to Pemberley. And I was very skeptical, and it's fantastic. It's a great novel, and they did a miniseries adaptation of it with Matthew Macfadyen playing Darcy and doing a brilliant job, and Wickham suspected of the crime, and Lydia's got to come back, and it's fabulous.
Love it. I did actually read Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, which makes me still makes me laugh, because why else would you marry Mr. Collins besides the fact that you were infested with whatever plague that was creating the zombies? Yeah, there's a lot of fun ones out there. So thank you so much for taking time to talk to me about Once Persuaded, Twice Shy and everything that we've covered. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. This has been lots of fun.
Thank you once again to Melodie for joining me for this conversation. I so enjoyed it, and I greatly appreciated her putting up with my dorky fangirling about Jane Austen. I'm not, like I said, the biggest or most knowledgeable Jane Austen fan on the planet, but I do love her. I love the books, and I appreciated the few nods to the actual books and Jane Austen in this modernization. You know, it wasn't just we're ignoring the fact that this is a modernization of Jane Austen, but it wasn't really overt either. I listened to a book a month or two ago that was I enjoyed it. It was a cozy mystery, but it had a Jane Austen society. I don't think they were a book club. I can't remember exactly what they were, but something based on Jane Austen. And every character in that book was just dropping Jane Austen quotes right and left. Besides the half agony, half hope, and half the time I can't remember if it's hope then agony in the quote, the only other Jane Austen quote that I can pull out is, it is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a fortune must be in want of a wife. And I probably messed that up. But anyway, so I did appreciate that there were nods to the novels and to Jane Austen, but not like everyone just madly in love with Jane Austen. Not madly in love with, but overly peppering everything Jane Austen in the story. If you are a fan of Jane Austen and you are a fan of modernizations, if you're just a fan of contemporary romance, then this is definitely a book that you will want to check out. It is a lot of fun. Even if you've never read Jane Austen, this might be a good introduction for you. It is, like I said, a contemporary romance. There are some really quirky, hilarious secondary characters in it. We did not talk about Double O Goose. There is a goose character in this book that is just wrecking havoc on the town. It's chaos personified, gooseified, but Double O Goose is hilarious. So there's some great quirky secondary characters, and of course it's a romance, so you're going to get your feel good, your happily ever after at the end. It's always worth the payout if you are a fan of romance, so definitely check this out. And I hope that you will join me for next week's interview. When I will be talking to Gina Wagner about her book Forces of Nature. This is a memoir. I do enjoy memoir. I haven't spoken to an author about a memoir in a while, so I'm looking forward to this conversation with Gina, and I hope that you will join me for that episode as well. In the meantime, I hope that you are having a great week. I hope that if you are a fan of this podcast and you have not done so already, you will like, follow, subscribe on whatever platform you are partaking of this podcast on. That not only helps you to give you notifications when there's a new episode, but it really helps the algorithm getting this podcast out to more book lovers such as yourselves. Also, you can follow leaving a nice review, positive review really helps as well. Thank you in advance. Don't forget to do that for your authors as well, the books that you love. And then if you want to follow the podcast on social media, you can do so on Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok. Love hearing from people who have heard the interviews. Which books have you read? Which books do you want to read? Which authors are you aware of or that you found because of an interview? I love hearing from listeners. So come find the podcast on social media and hit me up with your questions. And as always, I hope that your week is going really well. Hope you had a wonderful and safe Memorial Day weekend, but whatever is going on in your life right now, I hope the world is giving you plenty of time to get yourself lost in plenty of good books. Talk to you next time. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm. 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 Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great. I don't wanna go to